I'm Millie McIntosh and I am joined by one of my oldest ride or die besties, Charlie.
Hi all, I am Charlie Bowd and I am the founder of Rumble Tums, and we are delighted to have you join us on Mumlemmas and More, where we talk a lot about everything and anything. Nothing is off limits. So how's your week been, Mel?
Pretty good. I've got a teething baby.
Oh,
But, we've been there before. It's just, lots of cuddles. And she's also being very cuddly and cute. So I'm kind of loving that.
She's so cute.
And Sienna's being really affectionate. So all in all, pretty good. How about you, babe?
Same old family stuff. Just hanging out with them, really. Working, family. It's all I do these days.
Well, luckily I managed to combine working with seeing you when we do the podcast.
Always, exactly. Yeah. It's the best. So today I'm excited about this one. We have a little reunion.
It sure is, but it's going to be a slightly different reunion to the ones that we actually used to have back in the day. We'll be sipping on chilled remedy kombucha rather than chilled magnums like we used to.
So true. It is a great alternative if you don't fancy an alcoholic drink.
Today's guest is a very old friend of mine. She is the host of the Saturn Returns podcast. It is Caggie Dunlop.
So Cag has also just published her book by the same name, Saturn Returns, Your Cosmic Coming of Age. And it has some great chapters on relationships, self-worth, and finding hope in difficult times.
So for this episode, we asked Caggie to come up with some topics that she really wants to discuss. And also we're going to be reflecting a little bit on our time when we were on Made in Chelsea. But first, I think we should get her in and start with a little bit of an icebreaker.
So welcome to the show, Cag.
Oh, thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
Good. So we usually start by doing a little icebreaker, and it's called Bring It Back or Leave It in the Past. So tell us, what would you bring back or leave in the past?
What would I bring back? Well, I think when we were speaking last week and we were
I came on Caggie's podcast.
She came on my podcast and we were like reminiscing and we were talking about when we first met and we were just describing the jeans Millie was wearing, and actually I think those kind of jeans, which is like low rise, like with cut like slits in them. And I was thinking about it afterwards. I was like, they were amazing. So maybe bring back that.
Do you bring back the kind of the low riser jean?
Maybe.
I feel like Julia Fox has been making that a thing.
She has been making that a thing.
It's like you need to have like a bikini wax before attempting that.
Yeah. So I'm all for those jeans.
Do you remember the Miss 60 ones that had like the zip at the back?
Oh my God, those were the jeans.
Yeah.
Those actually might have been the jeans you were
wearing. And they
wearing.
had the low belt
We
as
were
well.
obsessed with Miss 60.
I thought they were the coolest
They used to
thing.
do paint splat. Everything was paint splat. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And ripped.
I remember going to High Street Kensington and going to Miss 60.
Me too.
Like being obsessed. And it was all
like forcing
super
my
low.
mum to buy them while she like winced at how revealing they were.
And your bum would like pop out the bottom of like every skirt they had, didn't they?
Yeah,
belt
their skirts were like little belts.
Were belts.
But that's now, it's a trend. Have you not seen like all of the Miu Miu?
I have.
Like,
I'm not sure about.
But I mean, that just literally reminds me of what I used to wear.
I don't want to be
parties
wearing
in my
one now. I
teens.
don't want my arse to be hanging out the bottom of one now, I have to say.
But I don't know, maybe those jeans. And then things that I would leave in the past, kind of in that era as well. I find some pictures of me from, oh my goodness, back when I was like in my early 20s. And something that
There's some shockers of us.
There's some shockers, but that I think a combination of things that just need to be left in the past, like sunbeds.
Yes.
Leave them in the past.
The pictures of me and you kind of around the time we went travelling.
It wasn't okay. We do you remember when we went to Spain? This is unacceptable. We went to Spain when we were 18. I think it was the first holiday we'd probably gone on without parents. And there was like 4 girls. And all we did was just sunbathe every day, probably coating ourselves in like olive oil, vegetable oil or something. And then at the end of it, because we weren't brown enough, we went to the local hotel and got a sunbed. And then got prickly heat.
Yeah.
And so did this other girl who's quite fair skinned. And so by the end of our holiday, we were like
purple.
Yeah.
We gave ourselves like literally like a skin condition because we were so desperate to be brown.
Yeah. And I think, a lot has changed now. There's a lot more awareness around skin damage and the sun and everything. But yeah, looking back on that, I'm like, glad we can leave that in the past.
So the first topic we want to talk to you about is about your inner child. So we're going from really light to really deep immediately.
Love it.
But I guess what Millie and I both want to know is, you talk a lot about it. What is it? Can you explain?
Mm-hmm. So I guess in like the personal development space, the inner child is this idea that all of us have our inner child that is often acting out or kind of grabbing the wheel in adult situations. And especially if we apply that to the context of relationship, I always think that there are 4 people like in that relationship, in a normal sort of 2-person relationship, because your inner child gets very activated and can get very triggered. And so the kind of inner child work, we often also call it like reparenting. So the healing process for the inner child is to reparent that part of you as your adult self in a way that perhaps you weren't when you were a child. So if you have, I don't know, if you had like abandonment issues, which doesn't necessarily mean that you were literally abandoned, but it might have been an experience where you felt like your parents weren't coming back, and that gave you that internal trauma. And then in your adult life, a situation that, again, you're not really being abandoned, but you feel like you might be, will trigger that part of you and set it off. And one of the phrases that I find so useful to kind of recognize when your inner child is being activated versus like, you know, your adult self is, if it's hysterical, it's historical. So if your reaction to a situation is kind of disproportionate to the situation that's actually happening, it's probably your inner child being activated. And that's the best way to kind of recognize when it is and to start that healing process.
Wow, amazing.
I heard someone say that I think it was actually Kendall Jenner. I saw it on like social media. She's doing inner child work with her therapist, or is currently doing it, and she said she put a picture of herself as a child on her bathroom mirror. Mm-hmm. To just help, like, every morning when she was like, you know, doing her skincare routine or washing her face, brushing her teeth, she would look at it and remember to kind of carry that image with her all day, so that you're remembering your inner. Sorry, I can't think the right way to describe it.
No, I know.
Do you know what I'm talking about? So
it was on Jay Shetty's podcast.
Yeah,
she was kind of doing it in like the dialogue you have with yourself, remembering that when you're speaking unkindly to yourself, you're talking to that child version of you, which I think is a really beautiful practice, because I think we can all speak very cruelly to ourselves in a way that we would never to a child, and we would never to a friend. But also, you know, I heard something really beautiful the other day that I think is a great practice, because obviously when we grow up and we turn into our adult selves and we have these lives and these relationships, and people might just meet that version of us and have no awareness over, you know, every chapter of our life. And if you ask yourself, like, again, when you might feel nervous or activated in a situation, ask yourself, like, who am I? Like, which version of me am I right now? And I believe that there's often one area or like one point in your life that you go back to. For instance, like, I'll give you a personal example. I get quite bad social anxiety, which people would never imagine when they meet me. Like, I'm very outward going, I seem very confident. But what happens for me when I'm in those situations is I feel like the 14-year-old version of me when I first was going to parties, and like boys wouldn't ever speak to me, and I just felt so uncomfortable. And when I'm in those situations, even as I am now, I feel
I'm the same.
That anxiety.
Yeah.
And so I think like that practice of going, who am I? Like, who am I actually, you know, inside, as well as like the person that I'm presenting to the world.
And what do you do like in those situations when you feel like that?
To be honest, it's still something I haven't mastered, but I think it's having the awareness of it, and a practice that is tremendously useful, but you have to recognize that it's happening and actually create space and take yourself away from the situation. And what you can do is, it's like as a kind of meditation practice, sit with yourself, imagine that version of you, and imagine the space.
The anxious version.
The 14-year-old, or like whatever place you see yourself, like in the past, and go to that, like imagine the space that you're in, the environment, and go back into that environment as your adult self. So that is like the real inner child work, because you're recognizing that that part of you is no longer who you are today, but you're also honoring that it exists and that it has feelings that are valid, that might not have been shown or expressed or made space for. So you go back to that version of you and you make space for whatever they're experiencing, and you kind of hold them through that and hold space for them so that they can process that anxiety in a healthy way and release it. And then it also gives you this recognition of, okay, I am actually an adult and I can handle these situations and I can manage these emotions and I don't need to feel that way anymore.
Yeah.
So you talk about this quite a lot in your on your podcast, Saturn Returns. So for our listeners who don't know much about Saturn Returns, can you explain a bit more about what that is?
So your Saturn return is something that happens in your late 20s, going into your early 30s, as Saturn as a planet returns to the same place in the sky it was when you were born. And within the realms of astrology, this is viewed as your big cosmic coming of age as we initiate into adulthood. And within that, we go through a lot of tough life lessons. It's kind of about stripping back anything that's inauthentic and allowing you to build something on solid and healthy foundations. It can be a very disruptive experience and transit and period of people's lives. And I think that's why if you look up a lot of stuff around Saturn returns, it's quite, I call it like Saturnophobic, where people are like, oh my God, I'm terrified about my Saturn return.
What, like people who are like younger, like thinking, okay, this is going to happen to me? Because I had like no awareness of that.
No, me neither.
Yeah. Most people I think of our age didn't. But the one, the community that follow the podcast and stuff, sometimes when they come to the live shows, they're like, I put the date in my diary. What's going to happen? I'm terrified. I'm like, I was never intending to do this. It's that I really want it, like, especially in the book, I want to reframe people's view on it, that actually, although you might get some tough life lessons, it's sort of tough love. Like, it's bringing things into your awareness so that you can face them and heal them.
And so once you've gone through your Saturn return, is that kind of the transition into more like adulthood and adult life? Because in my 20s, I definitely don't think I felt like an adult. But now I'm in my 30s, I do feel like I've had to grow up quite a lot.
Yeah. And, Saturn has 7-year cycles. So if we look back at our life, and this kind of reflects quite nicely into the kind of chapters of our life, like, as Earth has seasons, so does Saturn, and they're 7 years. So if you look back and think of yourself at 7, 14, 21, up until your Saturn return, and then it continues, they are these quite big cycles and mini initiations. And then your Saturn return, because it's done a full loop, is like this big one. But at 14, we kind of have this sense that we want to rebel. We have a sense of our own autonomy. We want to kind of like push against our parents and like be free.
Yeah.
We think we're kind of adults in a way, but we're just, if you look at me, a 14-year-old now, you're like, I'm such a child.
It's funny what you look back and you think, when you were 14 to kind of 16, you thought you were so grown up, and then you look back now and you're like, how funny. I was literally a baby. Like, what was I doing? It's funny.
I know. And then 21 as well. It's such a big milestone in someone's life where you are again kind of going out into the world. You haven't quite like mastered what it means to be an adult, but you have a lot more.
Me and you decided to go on a reality show.
Yeah,
definitely hadn't mastered
but
what it meant to be an
that's
adult.
a huge thing to go through when I guess you are still learning and still developing.
Yeah. So that was quite an extraordinary kind of, and I speak about that in the book. The start of that 7-year cycle was doing reality TV. And that, again, was, perhaps it was a little more heightened because we were being documented. But ultimately, the lessons that we were navigating weren't any different from anyone else our age.
No, but we just had the like pressure of being in the public eye.
Yeah, exactly.
So what have you learnt about the ways in which you were parented, and kind of how has that been helpful on your own journey?
I was actually listening to a podcast. Yeah, it's a huge question. It's actually very appropriate timing because I was listening to a podcast this morning on kind of generational cycles and how our relationship, not only our relationship with our parents, I think that is something that is often considered on how we relate to the other, but also how our parents were and how their relationship was, and like how they parented us, and how that informs our behavior on a very subconscious level. So often we end up just replicating the same scenarios you often see with people that perhaps, I don't know, had an alcoholic father, then end up with an alcoholic. Do you know what I mean? It's like all sort of in there, that is your understanding of love, and it's also familiar. So I was listening to something about that, particularly in the context of, I guess, like how I relate. And I don't know, I think, again, like our parents didn't have the language that we have. They didn't have the tools. I think it was more, you know, again, it was like they picked from a handful of different jobs and just that was it. So I don't know, I'm like mindful of like how much to go into it, because I also appreciate that
it's hard to talk about it, isn't it?
I you don't want to like
through therapy, like, and I've had questions asked about my parents, and I've been so defensive of them.
As in of them asking you about?
No, as in like when a therapist asked me about stuff to do with my parents, and they've been like, well, it's interesting that you've got this anxiety. It must stem from your early years. And then like, you know, I'd be like, my parents were always perfect. And they were like, started unpicking it. And I was like, fuck, I've got like dad issues. And I like never thought I did. But then actually like something like just not being hugged enough, or, you know, my parents are amazing, but did they give me enough like physical affection? Like, did they tell me enough? Mm-hmm. And like, maybe not. And stuff like going to boarding school when I was really young, like it's all really like affected me. Mm-hmm. And now I'm in my 30s and I've got my own kids. I'm suddenly having to like ask these questions, and it's actually I found it really confronting and uncomfortable.
I think at this period of life, whether it's children that brings it on or just kind of going through your Saturn Return or something, you do have to look back at that stuff.
Yeah.
And the problem is when we're children, we glorify our parents. They are on a pedestal, they're godlike figures, and they can do no wrong. And then as we become adults, we recognize that actually they are flawed and human just like we are. And that can be a difficult thing to see, because, you know, we've had them on this pedestal for so long, and then the alternative feels like, okay, well, if I pierce that reality, what is going to like be unpacked, and how will I manage it? I think whilst it's really important and valid to do that so that we don't replicate the same mistakes, especially as we become mothers and parents, it's also important not to overly villainize our parents.
I agree,
because I think some people, like, especially when they start going to therapy and they do like pull that thread, and then suddenly they'll stop speaking to their parents or something like that. And it's my belief that we are all doing the best we can with the tools and the self-awareness we have available, and that includes our parents, you know, that generation at that time.
I think you have to look at also like what made them the way they are.
Yeah, exactly.
And having that understanding makes it like it's not
so
about
important.
you, it's like the way they were brought up or the way they were conditioned to be.
That is so powerful, actually, because when you do sort of realize, okay, they are like flawed as well, but then rather than just kind of get into that like perpetrator and victim dynamic, it's like, okay, well, what was their experience like? What was their parenting like? My dad went to boarding school when he was 7.
Yeah,
and
I think mine went when he was 8.
Yeah, and, you know, even he spoke to me about, and he's like not an open person about this kind of stuff, but he said like a year or 2 ago, he was like, I keep having dreams about being back at school. And it was so interesting that even like after all this time, and I just view him as like my dad, that he obviously still is like that 7-year-old version of him that felt like his parents didn't want to be with him.
He was kind of having his like inner child, like it was like coming up for him.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I also think our parents' generation haven't really done any therapy.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Unless they've actually had a big trauma,
a divorce or something,
or maybe some help around death in the family or something. But it's not as I don't feel as normal for that generation to kind of have done this self work.
That's why I think it's so important for our generation that we do have these conversations and that we are doing that self work. I think for the next generation, I think it will be a totally different generation, maybe because of that, because 100%. We're just so much more aware. of who we are.
And it requires a lot of work, I think, for us to do to kind of heal that cycle or break that cycle.
Yeah. So, Mill, do you think becoming a parent has made you reconsider how you were parented?
Yeah, definitely. It's made me ask a lot of questions. I think becoming a parent has made me want to be the best version of myself. And as you know, like I've been working on like my mental health and wanting to feel like 100%. And I'm in a really great place now, but I've been doing therapy, which at times has been really uncomfortable because I've had to go back and look at the way that I was parented, because kind of in unpicking my kind of anxiety issues that I've had for like most of my adult life, it all stems from my formative years, which like normally these things do stem from, I think it's like, 0 to 7.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So, and for me, I think it's specifically around kind of even when I was like 8, 9 and went to boarding school for the first time, I think I was 9. And it's been, I've had to kind of actually ask like uncomfortable questions about my parents and the way and like the decisions that they made and how that's affected me now. And I do think I have done some inner child work, and actually I've literally like sobbed my eyes out, like trying to connect back with that like young girl, like little girl. And I definitely think like carrying them around with you in terms of like monitoring your inner dialogue and the way you talk to yourself, I think that's really important, and that's really helped me to be kinder to myself and like to be more gentle with myself and less critical.
So if this has such a huge impact on the rest of your life, 0 to 7 is presumably one of the most important times in a person's life.
Which puts a lot of pressure on parents.
It's a lot of pressure on parents.
When you've never done it before and you're just trying your best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Babe, we're
No
doing
pressure
great.
then.
So I think all you can do is do your best, but I think having children does make you suddenly think, right, okay, I am literally building a person, and you want to give them their best shot at life.
Yeah.
So I think understanding the way that we are and the way that our parents made us helps us look at how we parent like our children and not passing things on.
Topic we want to talk to you about is just women and conforming. How can we avoid conforming as women?
It's a subject that I find myself exploring a lot at the moment, probably because of the age I'm at and the conversations that I'm having. And if you think about it, it wasn't very long ago when women weren't able to work. We weren't allowed to have passports without our husband signing them. We weren't able to get a mortgage. I think we forget how far we've come in quite a short space of time. And of course, there's still a long way to go, and the conversation is an important one to be having. But equally, I think we need to remember that that's all very much in our subconscious. So for an example, I always find it interesting that the narrative for women in their late 20s to early 30s from men is like as if it's a dangerous pool of women. Like, and also for women I've met at that age that are single, the scarcity mentality is crazy, and the pressure that they feel is crazy. It's like they have this very narrow window to find the right partner, to have kids, to like get all of these things ticked off because that's what they think they need to do. And that in itself, I think, is conforming to something that's been socialized for us. But equally for men of the same age, it's like bachelor, he's a catch, he's silver fox. Like if you look at the language around men and women that are in actually exactly the same situations but get given such different terms, like we've got the spinster, Bridget Jones. If you actually like watch Bridget Jones, like she's actually quite an attractive, normal-sized woman.
Yeah, she's gorgeous.
So very old. And it was like this tragic story of a woman that's single in her 30s. And actually, if you unpack that, it's really important that we do, because otherwise I feel that women that have so much to be happy and excited about feel less than because they haven't ticked those boxes that society makes them feel that they need to become a woman.
So true. Do you feel that? Have you felt that? Have you felt pressure and the need to conform to?
I think it's impossible not to in the world that we live in. And when I have conversations with other women, especially when I was single, because I've been with my partner for 1.5 years, but before that, I would have to really reject that noise and question it. And I still do. Like, for instance, I was with a friend the other day, and this guy, he's a friend of hers, showed up, and he's like 37, really lovely guy, and he's single and he's dating. And he was talking about the women that he knows that are in their late 20s to early 30s. He was like, but you know, they're wonderful women, but the pool is so small, it's so hard for them to find. And I was like, no, I just don't want to buy into that, because I think the more people just accept it, the more it creates that anxiety. And then inevitably what happens is we settle for way less than we deserve. And then down the line, we're like, I kind of knew this wasn't right, but I was so desperate just to make myself feel like I have achieved what I'm supposed to by a certain period of time, that you end up making a massive mistake. And so I think it's important to engage in conversation and follow people that are living life differently. I think someone amazing who's doing this is Ruby Warrington. And I think I've told you about her because she does a lot around being sober curious. She coined that term, but also she's just released a book called Women Without Children. And it's all about, you know, having a life without kids and what that looks like, and how we should encourage people to want to live their life a little differently should they want to. Perhaps they do want to get married and have kids and do the traditional things, but perhaps they don't. And I think that's just an important dialogue and conversation to have.
I think women are amazing at supporting each other, but I also think that we can fall into the trap of like of comparison, and also, you know, kind of judging each other as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
Sort of the female wound of, I often think about it, and again, this is a whole like other discussion, but the sort of, if we think about the witch trials, the way that women were pitted against each other and were literally like burnt at the stake. And I think that does create that kind of trauma of like us turning against each other, of not honoring our feminine intuition. And also to kind of go back to what we were just discussing, if it hasn't been that long where women are able to work and do all these things, we're still very much occupying a man's world and living in the patriarchy. So it makes us feel like there isn't space for all of us. So if we see another woman succeeding or doing something, we don't think, oh, that's awesome, I'm going to do that too. We think there's not enough room for me to do that, so I'm going to try and pull her down. And that's something we all need to be conscious and aware of, because we're kind of harming ourselves and we're not progressing things along. We're not pushing the needle along if we are shaming each other rather than celebrating each other.
How do you think we can avoid doing that?
I think the best way is to actually recognize when you start feeling that way. So like, let's say you follow someone on Instagram and you see them living a life or doing the things that you might quite like to do, to know that there is space for everyone. Just because someone's doing something doesn't mean that you can't. And we all have our own uniqueness and our unique abilities, and no one is going to do something exactly the same. And I think that's something we recognize as we get older, that the most important thing for kind of getting on track with your purpose is just being more you. So whilst it's, you know, we might see people and think that's inspiring, we're never going to be exactly like them. So it shouldn't really be a threat. It's like, okay, just focus on being more you,
completely
knowing what your gifts and your unique abilities are, and kind of allowing them to blossom. And sometimes when we see someone succeeding, the truth is that we're realizing that we haven't allowed ourselves to blossom or show, to be seen. So rather than recognizing that, we go, have you seen what she's doing? I can't believe her.
The audacity to do that.
Yeah, rather than going, where am I not allowing myself to blossom and be seen?
Do you think women do that then? Do you think women kind of keep themselves small?
100%. Yeah, in like many, many, many aspects. And that's something that, you know, I also think that a woman in her fullest expression of self that's like fully liberated is a terrifying thing to the patriarchy. So that's something that we are constantly working against.
Do you think it's changing?
I think it is changing, but I think it's going to take time. And with all these things, when there is progress made, the pendulum also swings in the other way. And we can see that happening around the world where, you know, rights are being taken away. And in many countries, women, it can progress and then it can regress. And I think we only think that when things get better, they keep getting better. And that's actually not the case. So I think it will require a lot of unified effort from both men and women.
Okay, so our second Mumlemma is really around friendship and how kind of becoming a parent can affect your friendship with your other friends who don't have kids yet. Is that something you found?
Well, I think when we are at this point in life, you know, when we are kids or teenagers and then go to university and everything, like we're doing everything at the same time. We're all doing our GCSEs at the same time, even if we're at different schools. And then we kind of go into the workplace at the same time. And then, you know, in your late 20s or mid 20s, whenever people want to start having children, it does then put people in different directions because priorities shift. You don't have as much time. It is definitely challenging. And I think it can be hard for people that really want that and then are seeing all their friends having it. I know that that's something I get a lot of messages about on the podcast. It's like everybody's getting married and having children and I feel like I'm being left behind, and that can be a really tough feeling. For me personally, I've always tried to diversify my friendship group so that it doesn't feel like everyone's doing one thing, you know, and that means having friends of different ages, some that have chosen not to have children, not to get married, so that I never feel like I should be doing something by a certain time. But at the same time, it is, I don't know, because I guess like for you and I, you had kids, and like, do you think that kind of, has that shifted things for you?
I think it's hard because it takes your attention away so much, and then when you're trying to cope with one and then like two young kids, which and mine were quite close together, you just suddenly have like less time, and like, you know, in my social life I feel like I've had to choose how much I can juggle. So it's hard, but like with our friendship, we've known each other so long. I feel like we have the kind of friendship we could literally not speak for like 6 months to a year and then like see each other and pick up, and it's like so comfortable. And that's when I think when you know like you're really good friends, they're still going to be there. I feel like I went back to work both times. Obviously with what I do, it's not 9 to 5, but I went back to work both times after about 3-4 months after each of the girls was born, and juggling kind of just parenting and working, I feel like it's quite hard. And then so I feel like my kind of social life and my friendships it's sad, but I feel like that's the thing I haven't had much time to nurture. Exactly. So yeah, that is challenging. I feel like there's only a handful of people that I actually see. Like it's difficult,
and it's really, I don't really know what the solution is to that, because I kind of think about it as if like our life is a pie chart, right? And we have our relationship, we have our friendships, we have our career, we have our hobbies, like whatever is in there to make us feel whole and fulfilled. But then, you know, and you need to try and nurture each of those things equally. So even like you notice a lot when people get in a relationship that they stop spending time with their friends, and that can create a bit of imbalance and not be very healthy. But then I can only imagine that, because when you do get in a relationship, you just have less time for seeing your friends. That's kind of the reality of it. But you have to be conscious of it so that you actually make sure you are nurturing those other relationships too. But having children, like adding that then takes up so much of that pie chart. Yeah. Inevitably, something's going to have to be sacrificed, right?
It's hard. Charlie, have you found that as well?
Totally. It was like the biggest change I ever went through. And I think they're so vulnerable and they need you so much, more than any other part of your life,
of course,
you know, does. So you have to prioritise it.
But it's probably not even a choice, right? Because it's just
not even a choice.
It's just primal, instinctive, like that
You're
is
right.
your number one priority.
I actually saw, I think it was the founder of Rodial, and it kind of stuck with me, said that I think when you become a mum, there are three things, it's kind of career, family, and social life. And you can only do two at the same
That's
time.
so true.
And it flips out throughout your life. So I think, before you're a mum, it's social life and maybe work. And then when you become a mum, it's family and, work and or social life.
So
So
true.
if you pick work, which I have, social life, it suffers. And, so I think about that a lot. Family has to come first. So the other one is up to you.
But if you need to work in order to support your family,
Yes.
then
Have a
that,
choice,
you don't really have a choice. And in order, so I've definitely found that. But when I sometimes start to notice that I'm feeling just a little bit down, or I have to kind of like sit with myself and be like, okay, which part of myself am I not
Which part of the pie
nurturing?
chart? Yeah.
And often it might be something like I haven't made time to go and exercise or meditate for like over a week, and so obviously I'm going to start feeling just grumpy and unsettled and maybe a bit anxious or whatever is coming up. And often I just really need to see my friends.
Yeah.
And just go and have like a really good laugh and just be silly and just like not be a mum and for a couple of hours, and just go and have like a really long lunch and just really open, honest conversation. Suddenly I feel so much lighter when I've done it.
I had that recently because as you know, I can be a bit of a hermit sometimes.
Yeah.
So I can't just disappear off.
I didn't know that.
Did you not?
No.
Oh my God, yeah. So I'm very content in my own company, but to the extent sometimes where, I take it too far. And like recently, my boyfriend, I was just feeling quite low. My boyfriend was like, when was the last time you saw your friends? I was like, I don't remember. It's like, but that's not why. That's not why. And he was like, I think you should organise to see your friends. And we ended up, luckily, like the next day, me and a group of like 4 girlfriends just happened to all be free on Friday lunchtime, which was kind of rare. And also just to take that time off from working. Because I think also we live in such a world that was like, we have to be go, go, go all the time. And just like a couple of hours having a pub lunch on a Friday was just like recharged me, just gave me that feeling of connection that I was lacking. Because ultimately we're wired for connection and we can't rely on our partners to be.
No, it's so different.
all
You
the
can't get
things.
that. You can't get like as much as I might like. Hugo is one of like my best friends. It's just not the same. Like I need my girls.
Yeah. And also in the way that we parent and build family units now is very different, and it seems to be worse, strangely, in a city that's so busy like London. And yet, I don't know, obviously you guys will be able to tell me this more than I can answer it, but it feels like often when people have kids, they actually feel more isolated in a city like London, because historically we've needed a tribe, a community, a village. People will come and look after the child. They'll be helping out in all these ways. Whereas in London, it's like you're around people all the time, but
Everyone's also so busy.
Everyone's so busy.
So that, in like WhatsApp groups when you're trying to meet up with other friends, and I find this, it's the worst is with other mums, but it's hard with friends in general. Everyone's sending dates they can meet up, and it's like 3 years time actually. People can actually all send a date that you can meet up, or stuff gets put in the diary, but it might be not for like 3 months. I find it a bit depressing.
I find that, and I'm all for like a spontaneous meet up, which just rarely exists as you get older.
Not 3 years ahead.
Like me and Charlie used to always, just because your PR office used to be around the corner from where I lived before pre-kids, and I would just wander in and we would just like chat and have these like long,
so nice.
Yeah, we do
these
once a
long
week.
Friday lunches.
Yeah, there you go.
It's like scheduling.
Friday
Got a
lunch.
schedule.
Yeah.
So I think it is important, definitely, to make time for your friendships, and sometimes it doesn't have to be like a really dressy girls' night out. It can be like the most casual, like literally like sitting in your PJs, like
having a tea.
Having a cup of tea and just bearing your soul, because that it does really like fill your cup back up.
100%.
How important do you think friendships are?
Oh my God. I think that was like my biggest Saturn return lesson, actually, because I was someone, I don't think I'm alone in this, that would prioritize romantic relationships. And so when romance came along, I would put that above everything else. And that, when I went through a big breakup during my Saturn return or just at the end of it, I speak about this in the book. It was, there was this void in my life that naturally happens when we do go through a breakup. And quite soon after, I was introduced to a girl called Kelly. And it was like platonic love at first sight. Like as soon as we met, we just connected straight away. And the friend that had introduced us was like, okay, I'm going to leave you guys to it. And we just chatted and chatted. And it was, that then kind of started that journey of platonic love, like I called it. It was like just as profound, but there's just perhaps not like as much, you know, all the films are around romance and things like that, but platonic love can be just as impactful. And I think it's important even within a relationship or even in a relationship to make sure that those are still being nourished. But that in itself can be hard. You know, we were just speaking about how when you have kids, friendship dynamics shift, but when you get in a relationship, also friendship dynamics shift.
I guess you have to work on a friendship like that, like a relationship. You have to have trust and, you know, all the things, I guess, that come with a relationship. It's probably as important.
I always think like our friendships are often our soulmates, you know, and they're always there to kind of pick up the pieces when things go wrong. So we do need to be mindful to like nourish and water those just as much as romance or anything else.
One thing I've definitely felt a bit conscious of since becoming a mum is that do my friends who don't have kids now just think I'm really boring? Because I might just like, or is it just all I talk about? Is it just, I feel like I can't help it to just talk about my kids, and I'm feeling such like mum mode. Sometimes it's hard to like turn it off. And I worry that my stories of like being covered in like sick and shit and stuff, which is probably not what my single or, you know, or my friends who don't have kids, do they just find that like kind of annoying and boring?
I don't think people find it boring, but inevitably your identity shifts, you know, and everything, like your life completely changes in every way. So probably the points of connection that you might have shared before might be...
Well, if they were like boozy nights out and like, you know, and dancing on tables, and you're kind of like, well, not really there anymore.
Exactly. So it's like whether the relationship is worth finding the new points of connection. And sometimes there just aren't any anymore. And that's totally fine, because that's just part of life and how things evolve. But I don't think it's that people find it boring. It's interesting because obviously like now at this age, when me and my boyfriend are going to see friends and stuff, the majority of people do have children. And sometimes it can be really inspiring, and we're like, we can't wait to do this, and certain people were like, oh my god, we're never doing this. So it just, I don't know, it's just varies.
It's sometimes worse being in that position where you see it all unfold before. It's like sometimes better being naive to it, just running into having a child, you know, when you can just see people, you know, scrabbling around. Think, God, that looks awful.
And sometimes people are like, guys, don't do it. We're like, okay.
But I guess, sorry, I was going to say, I guess you have also changed. It's not about a motherhood question. It's like, I guess your friendships must have evolved too, and points of connection must have changed for you 100%. In a different way. So like you were saying, yes, maybe you would be dancing on tables before, and for you, presumably that's totally different. So have your friendships evolved?
100%. So much. But there's also, you know, interestingly, ones that have come back around that for periods of life we didn't have that point of connection because perhaps it was revolved around partying or whatever, and I just didn't feel comfortable in that environment. But the ones that really had something solid, like there was something really, like a real connection there, have just kind of transformed into a different sort of friendship. And I think that that's a really beautiful reminder for people, because there's a lot of conversation around breakups, but there's not that much around friendship breakups. And there's often never any closure, and both parties are left feeling like, did I do something wrong? Did they not like me? Or, you know, all these very confusing things. So I think that it's important to remind people that actually it is part of the process of life. And if there's a real connection there, it will come back around. Perhaps it won't be as like intense. You won't be doing like every single thing together, but you'll still have that love and appreciation for each other and respect that you're on different journeys or different paths.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to Are You Toff Enough, which is our Made in Chelsea trivia quiz. And I'm going to be asking...
Look at the face.
Massive detour.
So we're just going to just end the episode
Lighten
with...
things up.
We're going to lighten things up.
We bookended this with some serious
Yeah, I like it.
light stuff.
I know, so like, when we've been in a really like deep topic, sometimes it's quite hard to like bring it back and go, okay, so just a bit of silliness now. And we are going to take it back to our Made in Chelsea days and a bit of nostalgia, and ask one of our lucky listeners if they know the answer to a question, and they are going to be in with a chance to win. Actually, this is a really exciting prize because this is something that I get asked about all the time. So I always wear this really gorgeous name necklace, and it's from a brand called Aurum Grey, and they make really gorgeous bespoke jewellery. And whenever I post a picture, literally anytime you can see the necklace, people always want to know where it's from. I think especially other mums really want to get them when they have their children and they want to have their initials or their names. I've got one where I've joined both the girls' names. I had separate ones that now I've got both on one chain. And so they have very kindly said that they're going to gift one of our lucky listeners.
That's a great prize.
Yeah, it's
Love
great.
that.
So yeah, Hugo actually commissioned this piece, which was really sweet because we'd already decided on the name before they were born. I think it's such a lovely gift for any new mum. So one lucky person will receive an Aurum Grey Connect name necklace with up to 10 diamond letters, just like the one I had when Sienna was born. Okay, so all you have to do is answer the following question correctly. Caggie might know the answer to this one. At the end of season 1, I put Caggie on her flight to New York. We both channeled strong coordinating airport outfits that day. What was the colour we were both wearing?
Do you know the answer?
I do.
You do.
I remember
Good.
it well.
I've got the image in my mind. In order to be in with a chance to win, you must make sure you're following Basement Chats and Aurum Grey on Instagram, like the giveaway post on @BasementChats, leave the answer to the above question in the comments. Additional terms apply, and the winner must live in the UK or Ireland.
Full T&Cs apply, and you can find them in the show notes. The competition closes at midnight on the Monday after this episode is released, and you can only enter once. The winner will be picked at random and contacted via DM on the Tuesday.
Right, we're coming up to the end of the show. It's been an amazing one.
Loved
we went
it.
deep.
Yeah?
We went deep.
We did go deep.
I love it.
I said before we started recording, I feel like I only have one mode now. It's quite off-putting for just, when I'm trying to have normal conversations with people, but...
You can't ask
No,
like,
I
hey, how are
loved
you?
it.
How was your weekend? It's like, well, my inner child thinks.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Cag. So that was an amazing chat. I think what I've taken away from it is just how we can influence our kids and the journey that they will go on. And yeah, so I feel like I've learned a lot, and I want to run home and teach them all these amazing lessons.
What I really love is just seeing noticing today. I was just sat there listening to Caggie talk. I'm like, I met this girl when I was 14 years old, and just seeing how she's evolved into a woman. We both changed so much since we were on the show together. And I feel like our friendship's changed, but it's definitely changed for the better. It's definitely got much deeper. I think just having a friend that you've had through so many different stages in your life, you don't have to see each other that often, and they just know you inside out.
I think you guys have shared a pretty unique journey and part of your life that no one else, very few people have experienced. And, that is unique in a friendship. And, how you guys you've evolved, from that time. And it's amazing to see.
Yeah, we've both changed a lot since our days on Made in Chelsea. But I think, we will be friends for life. And yeah, I loved having her on. And it was really interesting having a guest on that isn't a mum, actually, and hearing her perspective.
Super interesting. Also kind of unpacks different topics that we kind of haven't gone into yet, which are just so interesting for every woman. I think she's super inspiring. I loved it.
I agree. It was such a great episode. And if you also enjoyed it, then please don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps other listeners to find our podcast.
So next week is our last episode.
Babe, I can't believe it. It's really gone so quickly this time.
Yeah, it is absolutely flown by. They're getting quicker and quicker, aren't they, each time?
Quicker and quicker. I think now we're in our third season. I feel like we're kind of relaxing into it a bit more.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We'll meet you all back here next week for the final episode of the season.
Can't wait.
Can't wait. Have you got a mumlemma that you'd like to share or one that we can help you with? If so, stay tuned on Basement Chats for our shout outs where you can DM us or you can email us at mm@basementchats.com.
Also, check out our YouTube channel for full episode recordings and behind-the-scenes clips. The channel is updated every Sunday. Just search for Mumlemmas. And remember to subscribe, like and comment. Please rate and leave us a review. We want to hear from you.
Please note, we're not experts, so please consult a GP or professional if you want to know more about anything we've spoken about on the show today.
Before we go, one last thank you to the tastiest kombucha around and this season's sponsor, Remedy Kombucha, available at remedydrinks.com/UK.
And of course, we need to thank our team as none of this would be possible without them. Thanks to audio producer Sarah Cudden of Feast Collective, Leo Hunter, video extraordinaire of Hatch 108 Productions, and Basement Chats for creating this space where we can all have this chat freely. Before we go, here's a snippet of what's coming up on our next episode. I don't think I'd jump to go skinny dipping these days, would you?
Oh, I love a bit of skinny dipping.
You've got a cracking bod.
I would if I was you. The feeling of swimming naked is just lovely, isn't it?
Oh,
very freeing.
Oh, there you go.
Love a skinny dip. I've got my sexy undies on. I've made the bed. I've had my coffee just how I want it. I'm walking to the gym laughing out loud to a funny podcast. Okay, so I'm not going to say the person's name to protect their identity.
Can you just describe what he looks?
It looks like an older gentleman who likes a gilet.
He loves a gilet.
A kind of puffer gilet and a cap.